From the gridiron to the hardwood, James Mesh breaks it all down. It's time for another episode of Cleats and Sneaks.
The NFL news cycle never really slows down, especially during the season. Whether you're looking at trades, whether you're looking at guys losing their jobs, whether it's guys on the field, the players themselves, or the coaches, or even the guys upstairs like the general managers themselves. I think you know where we're going with this one. Welcome into another edition of Cleats and Sneaks, the podcast, talking about everything that's going on with the NFL and the NBA. It's a good thing that we're kind of in that middle part of the season, still really early on with the NBA, but also we're in the real thick of it with the NFL. And the big thing that I really want to get to is the rumors and also the recent news that broke today. We'll start with that one. How about Joe Douglas, the GM for the New York Jets? He got fired today, and it's not really that much of a shocker. It's not like it was something that was brought up over the last couple of weeks, but based off of what we've seen from the Jets so far this year, who, might I add, was projected by USA Today to finish 12-5 in the 2024 season, and wait for it, win the Super Bowl. Have they gotten anywhere close to it? No. They're 3-8 heading into the Week 12 bye. Not looking good for them. And you can also kind of tell, because not only did they fire their head coach and Robert Saleh, they also tried to make the desperate move to go get Davante Adams from the Las Vegas Raiders. Those two necessarily haven't led to any real wins because they're still losing a majority of the time. And the most recent thing that they've done, fire general manager Joe Douglas. And it's really interesting because you look at Joe Douglas's tenure with the Jets. After 5+ seasons, the record for the Jets, 30-64. I'm no math major, and I struggled in a couple of math classes in college. But 30-64, not a good record. Not at all. Oh, man, those Jets, they're really struggling. And then you look at some of the other teams. We already know that the Saints have fired Dennis Allen. I brought that up on the most recent edition of Cleats and Sneaks. So far, the Riz man, Darren Rizzi, has the Saints 2-0 heading into their bye week. So now the Saints are 4-7, looking a little bit better, especially since Tampa Bay is really starting to get bit with the injuries. And Atlanta doesn't look as good as maybe a lot of people anticipated, as they've lost the last couple of games, especially last week to the Denver Broncos. It wasn't even close. So it's really interesting to see how that is unfolding for the NFC South. But also the fact that you look at the Browns, who most recently lost to the Saints. They're 2-8 at this point. And Kevin Stefanski, who's been a pretty good head coach for the Browns ever since he took over that organization, they've been able to win some games, been able to go to the playoffs a couple of times. However, this season, not been very good. Despite what's been going on, the fact that you now have Jameis Winston as your starting quarterback since an injury to Deshaun Watson, his season is done. It really hasn't resulted in any wins for the most part, outside of the one where Jameis did start his first game of the season, and they were able to beat the Baltimore Ravens. But a lot of rumors are saying that Stefanski is on the hot seat. However, he was asked about it, and unsurprisingly, he wasn't worried about his job security. And I say unsurprisingly because how often do we actually hear a coach in a press conference or during the week get asked, coach, are you really worried about your job, or do you feel like you're going to have to really fight for your job over this next week and over the remainder of the season? How many of the guys are going to be like, yeah, I'm expecting them to give me the boot within the next couple of days, or if I lose this week, I expect them to tell me to kick rocks. Who says that? Who says that? Now, the big thing to me, though, I think Kevin Stefanski is still a pretty good coach. I just think that he's maybe warmed out his welcome a little bit out in Cleveland, and maybe it has gotten a little stale. Maybe it's just a really bad luck of things. I don't really expect him to get fired because we've seen other really bad coaches there before coach multiple seasons where they have just as bad, if not a worse record, and they do it over multiple seasons, and Cleveland finally decides to fire him. So I don't expect Stefanski to get fired. I think he still gets another chance. Now, if he does this again next year, completely different story, and you're cleaning house over there in Cleveland. However, Looking over in Jacksonville. It's really interesting because we heard rumors that they were supposed to fire Doug Peterson if they lost again. This time they faced the Lions, who's one of the best teams in the NFL. What'd they do? They lost. They lost 52-6, and I thought, this is the final nail in the coffin. They're going to get rid of Doug Peterson. They didn't. He's still, Tuesday afternoon at 4:48 as I'm recording this podcast, he still got a job, which is, I'm shocked. I thought because of all the rumors that we had heard that if the Jags don't look good because they're projected the number one pick, you're going to get fired. He isn't. I don't think it really matters one way or another, but I'm just really shocked with how bad they've been, especially since a couple of years ago they make the playoffs. They make the huge comeback win in the wild card round against the Los Angeles Chargers. And then last year just was a down year. A couple players get injured, a couple of things going on over there in Jacksonville, but you thought, okay, maybe because of the extension, because they have the belief in Trevor Lawrence, they'll be able to take that next step forward. And then you even get the shiny new toy in Brian Thomas. I thought maybe it made the offense look a little bit better. 2-9 record says otherwise. So it's really interesting to see how everything's been going down when it comes to the coaching and the upper management side of things has gone with these NFL teams. Now, when it comes to the NBA, however, let me tell you, those New Orleans Pelicans, they are really struggling, and it's not like the schedule really gets a lot better. They're 4-10 right now. They're by far in the bottom half of the Western Conference, and you look at the next couple of games. They did get the win against Denver, which is nice. They got that on Friday, and for some reason, the Pelicans play really good on Fridays, and they then lost on Saturday to the Los Angeles Lakers. But here's the next couple of games. At Dallas tonight. Then on Wednesday, at Cleveland, who's undefeated. Versus Golden State, who you've already struggled twice with. At Indiana, who is looking a little bit worse than I think some of us anticipated, but still really early in the season. Versus Toronto, not as bad. And then at Memphis, at New York. So, I wouldn't say it's a murderer's row, but it's definitely not an easy one, especially with them dealing with all the injuries. At this point, the only healthy guy from the starting 7 at the moment is Brandon Ingram, a guy that a lot of us were waiting to see, do they actually trade Brandon Ingram in the offseason? They never did, so we've been kind of on a countdown alert of when do the Pelicans trade Brandon Ingram during the season before the trade deadline? Does it happen a couple weeks before? Does it happen the day before the deadline? Does it happen the day of the deadline? At this point, he's the only guy that's giving you life. I look at the last 4 games. BI, high scorer against the Lakers, 32 points. BI, high scorer against the Nuggets, 29 points. Highest scorer versus Oklahoma City, pedestrian 18, but no one in that game played well. Brandon Ingram, player high, 24 for the Pelicans versus the Nets. 3 out of 4 of those were losses. Ever since then, it just hasn't been good. He's really been the only guy that can consistently give them offense. Now, Brandon Boston's actually kind of been a little bit of a surprise, but a majority of the lineup for the Pelicans has been from their G League team. Like, these guys aren't supposed to have the minutes that they're supposed to have. You kind of expected Javonte Green a little bit to carve himself a little bit of a role. It seemed like he was getting a lot more minutes than I think some of us anticipated, especially during that first game versus the Bulls on opening night for them. But outside of that, guys like Brandon Boston, a whole bunch of other players. Like, I'm trying to remember the guys off top because I'm so used to Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, CJ McCollum, Zion Williamson. I'm Jose Alvarado. Like, I'm so used to these guys supposed to be getting major minutes and being the majority of the rotation, but they're not on the floor. They're all injured at the same time. And it's still early in the season. 14 out of 82 are already played. 4-10 start, definitely not good, especially when you look at the standings, especially in the Western Conference. Since the Pelicans are the 14th seed, the only team that is worse is the Utah Jazz. But if you can get through this bad stretch where you have to play a bunch of good teams and you somehow survive and actually get a couple of wins over the next couple of weeks, hopefully you'll be able to get some of your guys back and then play a little bit of a lighter load of the schedule and get yourself back into it. Because even though that's the case and you've lost multiple games to Portland, who is the 13th seed at 6-8, Dallas hasn't looked great. They've looked a little bit better. So if you can get somehow a win tonight on the road, I think with how the Western Conference is and how early it is, you can keep yourself afloat and hopefully find yourself at that 8, 9, 10 seed later into the season. Now, the one thing that has really been interesting, especially on the Eastern Conference side of things, is the fact that the Orlando Magic is still 9-6 despite not having Paolo Banchero, guys like Franz Wagner, and all those other guys, Jonathan Isaac, like all of them, they've been able to play really well for them and actually be third in the Eastern Conference. It's actually been really surprising to see from them. But I am really curious. There's a big time matchup tonight, and I really want to see how this goes down. Boston versus Cleveland, because Cleveland usually plays Boston pretty well. And even though it was a 4-1 gentleman's sweep in favor of the Celtics in last year's Eastern Conference semifinals, I thought Cleveland played them really well, especially since Darius Garland didn't seem like he was out there. He definitely did not have himself a good series. I don't think that he was in the right mindset to kind of be one of the focal points of Cleveland's offense. Plus, you had also Donovan Mitchell go down the last couple of games of the series. You were really relying on guys like Evan Mobley to carry the torch against a loaded Boston Celtics squad. But since Boston hasn't looked as great, they're still getting wins. They're 11-3 versus a 15-0 Cleveland Cavaliers team. I still expect this to be a close game, and I'm still waiting to see what Boston can actually do over the next couple of weeks as they get more and more into it and actually get closer and closer to Kristaps Porzingis playing. Still love the matchup, though. I expect this to be a high-scoring affair because Cleveland has not scored less than 105 points all season. So a lot of offensive basketball against a defense in Boston that hasn't been as good as it was last year. So if the Celtics are going to win, kind of feels like unless it's a really off night or they're really forcing Cleveland to take some tough shots, I expect this to be the over. I expect you to take the over. Especially since you look at multiple times the Cavaliers have scored 130, 120. Like they've been doing this consistently. And it's not like Boston has been a team that hasn't been able to do that. I mean, because of the bad defense and them still being able to win games, they still had to beat teams like the Raptors 126, 123. They beat the Nets 139 to 114. So I think because of this, and also the fact that the Celtics like to shoot a lot of the three ball, I'm expecting the fact that it's 235.5, which is still a pretty large number. I am not against the idea of taking the over on total point score between these two teams. I think 6.5 feels like a lot in favor of Boston. I know that they're the home team, but I think it's going to be a lot closer, but I do think it is going to be a very high-scoring affair. That's going to do it for another edition of Cleats and Sneaks. Appreciate you listening in and tuning in to another edition. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, ESPN Southwest Louisiana, where we upload a bunch of local content for all of our local teams, plus also have a bunch of different good podcasts for you. Four Tire Change with Dawson Igelo, the Miguez Mindset with Matt Miguez, as well as Over Par with Matt Miguez. But until then, appreciate you listening in, and I'll talk to you next time.